So we've had this news that KSI is linking up with the Sauerland brothers and Wasserman Boxing, however you pronounce it, to start a joint promotional company. As far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, at the time of recording this video, it was unclear the nature of the shows they're going to be putting on, whether it's just going to be YouTuber type shows, YouTuber TikToker shows, or whether it's actually going to be real professional boxing or a mixture of the two. Now, I know a lot of people don't like this. A lot of people believe that this is going to essentially box food out of real fighters' mouths. I personally disagree. I think that these type of people, KSI, Logan Paul, Jake Paul, bring more attention to the sport, and they inspire people to give it a go for themselves. I mean, just look at how many of the friends of Logan Paul and KSI have done the same thing that they've done and tried to have a go at boxing. You seriously think that among their fan bases, a similar thing isn't going to be happening as well? It will be. There are going to be nerds, right, in their fan bases who are going to want to take up boxing. And by the way, not all boxers grow up as the tough guy in their neighborhood. There's plenty of fighters. Some turn out to be great fighters who are really shy people who, if they hadn't taken up boxing, they would have been doing, I don't know what, but they would have been very reclusive. Boxing reveals qualities in people that they often didn't know they had themselves. I've seen it myself in boxing gyms over the years. People take up the sport, and after a couple years, once they realize they've got some talent for it, their confidence just goes through the roof. And prior to taking up boxing, they were very timid individuals. So, boxing is a sport full of alpha males, yes, but it's also a sport full of diamonds in the rough. People who, otherwise wouldn't be overtly confident and what have you, and self-assured. But they found that they had this latent ability, this latent talent for boxing, and it allowed them to grow as a person and do things they never imagined they could do. So I think that with YouTube boxing, even though it's a bit of fun, even though it's not as serious as proper professional boxing, it can still be an avenue of inspiration for certain people. And for that reason, I think it's good. I think that there will be a minority. It's not going to be the majority, but there'll be a sizable minority of KSI fans, Logan Paul fans, etc., who will migrate over to professional boxing in terms of watching it at the very least. Yeah, people who wouldn't have been interested in boxing previously, due to watching KSI and, the Paul brothers and so on, they then start to take an interest in proper boxing. So I think it's good. And as I said before, if these YouTubers weren't settling their differences through the medium or the format of boxing, they could be doing it through MMA. And therefore, all that extra attention would be going to that sport rather than boxing. I've been following this sport for over 30 years now. And one thing I've come to learn about boxing fans, particularly the so-called hardcore boxing fans, is that most of them are absolutely miserable. I mean, they're just so negative all the time about the sport. They're always glasses half empty rather than glasses half full. They're always looking at the things we don't have in the sport rather than the things we do have in the sport. So I don't really pay them too much mind. For me, the more the merrier. Now, in terms of the broadcast situation, if Sky are going to pick this up, because they obviously put on Logan Paul versus Mayweather, if they're going to pick this up and solely I mean, they've got this Top Rank deal, so they're clearly not solely going to do YouTube or boxing. But even if they did, right, let's just say they did, would I be in favor of that? It wouldn't be ideal, because you don't want, even though I've got my issues with Sky, you still don't want DAZN having a monopoly. You still don't want Eddie Hearn having a complete monopoly. You don't want that, because Eddie Hearn has talked about in the past how he has so much admiration for Dana White, how he would love to have a UFC style model in boxing. I think that would be terrible for boxing. I've made this comparison before, and I think it's a very valid comparison and an accurate comparison. But the internal structure of UFC is almost like a communist structure. Okay? Obviously, you wouldn't have an organization like UFC in a fully communist society, but I'm talking about the internal structure. The internal structure of UFC is like communism, because you've got a big government, right? The people that run the UFC and own the UFC, they're very powerful, far more powerful than the fighters. And the fighters, I don't know what it's like contractually, but they're essentially like employees. And the wealth distribution between the highest earning fighters and the lowest earning fighters in UFC is not as wide, right? The pay gap is not as big in UFC as it is in boxing. So you could look at boxing and say there's more inequality in boxing, because the highest earning is very top heavy. The highest earning guys are making insane amounts of money. But the lowest earning guys, I mean, you couldn't even call it a pittance. They're better off working in Tesco's. That's how little they're earning. But in boxing, there is the ability for a fighter to go from zero to hero in a very short space of time and earn far more money than they would be able to in something like the UFC. Way more money. Because in boxing, for the most part, the fighters, and I'm talking about the biggest fighters, they are bigger. Their brand is bigger than the promotional company that promotes them. Canelo Alvarez, in the eyes of the public, is a bigger brand. Obviously, Matchroom makes insane amounts of money. We know this. But in the eyes of the public, and because Matchroom, of course, promote countless different fighters. So the accumulation of all the percentages they get from all these different fighters makes them very powerful. But if you look at somebody like Anthony Joshua, per show, he's making more money than Eddie Hearn. He's making more money than Matchroom. Yeah, per show. Same with Canelo Alvarez and so on. Whereas you look at most of the top people in UFC, it's not like that. The promotional company is making far more money than they're making per show. And on top of that, the promotional company, UFC, is a bigger brand name than the fighters themselves. Yeah? So in boxing, it's more like a capitalist thing where it's like snakes and ladders. It's economically a lot less stable. It's more like the Wild West. But I prefer that. Yeah, I think that allows fighters to have more opportunity to basically become their own bosses. That's essentially what I'm getting at. You can really be your own boss in boxing, at least to a certain degree. Then you've got the TV companies and all that. But with the internet, surely it wouldn't be that hard for a fighter to set up their own internet channel, where they could stream things online and do things that way. So there's far more ability in boxing for you to be your own boss than there is in something like UFC. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of the UFC model. I respect the UFC fighters and all that kind of business, but I would not like that kind of model in boxing. And therefore, and this is something, by the way, Chris Andre mentioned in a recent video, therefore, I would not like to see the UFC model implemented in our sport. And therefore, you're going to need Sky, BT, and all these other entities to still stay in the game. And of course, in America, PBC, ESPN, and so forth. Obviously, there's a trade-off. There's politics between the different organizations. But ultimately, I'm always pro-fighter. I always care about the fighter being able to be their own boss, being able to get paid the maximum possible amount, and so on. So, yeah, that's my take on it. But as far as KSI hooking up with Sauerland, Wasserman Boxing, and all this business to do their own shows, in principle, not only do I not have an issue with it, but I think it's great. I think it's great. I think it shines a light on the sport more, and you're going to have unlikely characters turning up to your local boxing gym, people who you wouldn't have expected to turn up, because it breaks down that intimidation factor. You know, when I was boxing in my teenage years, I had friends who were, tough guys, roadman. And yeah, some of them actually were boxers and they did come to the gym and they had amateur careers and stuff like that. But most of them weren't. I knew certain men that would have street fights and they were tough guys on the roads. But when I invited them to come to the gym boxing, they didn't want to come. They had this, and obviously this is back in the 1990s, they had this idea in their head that as soon as they step in a boxing gym, it's going to be full of Mike Tysons and they're going to be thrown into the ring immediately and, somebody's just going to unleash Mike Tyson on them or something. So people have this idea in their head that boxing gyms are really intimidating places. The very same people will go to a fitness gym, but they won't go to a boxing gym. Well, actually, in a boxing gym, it's far more friendly than a fitness gym. Most of the time. In most fitness gyms you go to, there's far more pretentiousness in there. There's far more overinflated egos and idiots and all that kind of stuff in fitness gyms than there is in boxing gyms. Yeah, boxing gyms, generally speaking, have much more of a family atmosphere. People tend to be much more kind and approachable and stuff like that in a boxing gym. This is what a lot of people don't realize. But through the likes of the KSIs and the Logan Pauls being in boxing gyms all the time, people are starting to see that more. Boxing gyms are not such intimidating places. You can come down and, nobody's going to set about you and throw you in at the deep end immediately. You don't even have to spar if you don't want to. You don't even have to fight if you don't want to. Just come down and see what it's all about. Yeah? It's a family atmosphere in most boxing gyms. So I think that, as I say, the YouTube boxing will help to break down those barriers and those misconceptions people have and realize that boxing gyms are nice, most of them nice, friendly places to come and train. A lot of people who go to boxing gyms just go there for the camaraderie. They have no real intention of fighting or boxing or anything like that. They just like training to stay fit and they like the camaraderie in the gym, which is far greater than you'll see in most fitness gyms. You got a bunch of pretentious people and steroid heads and all these idiots. Whereas in a boxing gym is for the most part, it's not like that. Obviously, you're always going to get idiots everywhere, even in boxing gyms. But for the most part, people are really cool in boxing gyms. So, yeah, that's what I'll say about it. I'm cool with this promotional situation, KSI, Sauerland, Wasserman Boxing. I think it's all good. It will inspire some people to take up the sport who wouldn't ordinarily have gravitated towards boxing. And even the people that are not going to take it up, but are just going to follow it, some of them, a minority of them, are going to migrate towards watching proper professional boxing rather than this YouTuber boxing. So that's my take on it. Let me know your take in the comments below. I'm sure plenty of you are going to disagree, and that's okay. As long as you keep it respectful, no problem at all. So let me know how you guys feel in the comments below. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.